I'm Ellen Rich. I lead internal communications for a company called Dover Corporation. We consist of about 15 different operating companies in 15 different industries around the world with about 24,000 odd employees in many different countries. And I'm really excited to be here. I've been doing this for about 25, 30 years now, a long time. And I'm excited to be doing this with the team. Allie, over to you.
Well, thank you, Ellen. I'm excited to be presenting with you. I'm Allison Gillis. I'm the Senior Internal Communications Specialist at South Shore Health. We're a regional health system just south of Boston, and I'm really proud of the advanced and the comprehensive care that we're able to provide to our community. We have about 6,500 full-time employed workers and a number of contingent workers as well. And right now, our primary product that we use through Staffbase is email. We've been using that for about 3 years. And I don't know if everybody stayed on from the previous session, but just to carry that theme over, we're sending our newsletter 5 days a week. So we're sending it out pretty frequently.
Pretty often. And ours is monthly. So it's interesting, right? You see the difference between what they were talking about before. It really depends.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the beauty of the dynamic between the two of you here is the differences in really how you communicate, because again, internal comms is so nuanced. There's not just one-stop shop, one size fits all to anything. So it'll be really interesting to kind of see the two takes that the both of you have. And that's going to drive us on to our first talking point, which is actually just a question. So I'm going to ask it, and then the two of you can kind of debate between yourselves. But in your experience, what are some of the biggest challenges when it comes to balancing quality and quantity in email communications, and how have you addressed them personally?
Allie, you want me to kick that off?
Sure.
Okay. So I think, as internal communicators, we often get locked into what people are clicking on, right? How many people are reading or clicking on the content? And those are really great metrics. But what we really need to be doing is partnering with our business owners, right, to understand what their desired outcomes are. And most of us do that, right? But it's not usually click rates, right? It's really about getting people to take action, right? So are they participating in learning programs? Are they building their business acumen? Are they participating in programs and events? Are they engaging in those two-way dialogue opportunities we put out there? And are they sharing their stories? And so, when we look at statistics, it's really to see if the content that we're putting out there is making a difference for the business. Is it helping them meet their business and strategy goals? Is it, really what they wanted as their outcomes? And so I think with quantitative and qualitative, right? Quantitative, and this is the part that always gets me, right? I always get these two messed up. But quantitative is, right, the readership, the clicks, the video views, et cetera, the survey completion, right, the attendance at events. But the qualitative stuff we should be really looking at are, the open-ended survey questions. What is the sentiment analysis from that? What about in-person feedback through focus groups and roundtables and walk and talks with leaders, or, open or anonymous town hall questions versus submitted questions that people have to put in their name? What's the anecdotal piece, right? Are more people feeling safe enough to share their stories? Are we getting comments on our internal social media from all levels of employees? Are the internal social groups that we have really, really growing, right? And are they branching out beyond the business? Are they bringing in some of the things that people are really interested in, maybe hobby or sports or wellness related? Are our business results improving? Are our customers happier? Those are some of the things that we would look at as those business outcomes versus just those quantitative clicks and likes and views. And so the point is really, I think, to think laterally up and down about, when we're analyzing our communications to how they make an impact, and help leaders understand, right, when it comes to feedback, the conversations that they may not want to hear are happening anyway. So it's better to be a part of those than not. So making sure that they think beyond those clicks and likes and things like that, and make sure that they're doing those in-person conversations. Then the last thing I would say is take the small wins, right? When we think about that quantitative versus qualitative, the quantitative can be really small. If you send a newsletter to 5,000 people and 5 people like it, but you got no negative responses, that's a win. I think that's an absolute win. Allie, what about you?
So when we rolled out the email, we kind of arbitrarily said, okay, we're going to do this 5 days a week and see how it goes. We definitely had enough content to be able to do that, but we weren't sure, how it was going to be received. And so it took a couple months of data to really establish our baseline. And then we kind of set that expectation that we're going to be sending it out 5 days a week. which we found, primarily has worked really well. But there are times like during the summer when, a lot of people are using their well-earned PTO and our open rates have kind of dropped because of that. And so as a protective measure, we've kind of set the expectation now that we're going on the summer cadence, like, talking about headers that the previous presenter was referencing. We have a different header for our email over the summer with like sun. So it kind of says, oh, we're on a summer cadence now. So it makes it seem kind of like it's more official than something that, we're kind of just like, oh, we don't want our open rates to drop in response to PTO. But something that I have found, even when we've moved back, to 5 days a week after the end of summer, is that when our health system is in what we call internal disaster, meaning, which sounds really, to people who don't know, it sounds really dramatic. But basically it means that we are operating over normal capacity and people are really, really, really busy doing their best to provide the best care to our community members who are coming to see us. And I've noticed that there's been a correlation between every time we go into this disaster status, and then it does affect my open rates for the email. They're just too busy to be looking at it. So that's something that I kind of just have to go with. And, we use email as our primary means of communication, not just staff-based email through our newsletter. Just as an organization, we rely really heavily on email. And so, what I would think that, okay, I'm putting this in the newsletter, people are reading it. No, maybe they're not. It's the end of their day and they're fried and they don't want to open one more thing, even if it's just the most succinct, beautifully designed newsletter that they will ever get. So I make sure that I do post content elsewhere just in the hopes that, a rising tide lifts all boats. So even if they're not looking at it through the newsletter, I'm still getting that engagement, and hope that, when they have more time and bandwidth to open the newsletter, they'll come back to it knowing that there's going to be good content in there for them.
That's a great point, Allie, especially, when you think about some of the different seasons, the cycles that your company goes through, right? When you're talking about earnings reports and things like that, or when you're doing quarterly earnings, that your finance teams are not probably going to be reading the communications that you send out because they are busy putting together what they need for the street, right? And so that's an audience that probably is going to have their readership rates drop. And when you know that, you can tailor some of your timing for your either global audience or for that team specifically. It's a great point.
Well, thank you.
We do have a pretty relevant question in the chat here, Ellen, this one specifically for you. What are some strategies to improve steady engagement with monthly newsletters?
Oh, that's a great question. I know we're talking about personalization later, but what really pulls people into the monthly newsletters is the stuff that makes them feel like it's about them, the what's in it for me, right? And to see their names in print is a big deal. All of us love seeing our name in print, right? When we kind of build that influencer status internally, or we build that subject matter expertise, those subject matter experts internally, people love to see those stories because it triggers that, ooh, I could put that story in there, right? It could be the story about me. The recognition piece, right? That's always a big piece to put in there too. So I think, when you're thinking about really driving engagement there, it's going back to the business strategies, making sure that what you're communicating is tied back to those business and people strategies, right? For the moment, right? Whatever you're doing that quarter or that month, and then pulling in the people related aspect, the what's in it for me and the why. Why does this matter?
And I think that is actually a really good segue for our next talking point, which is, how have you seen personalizing emails boost engagement in your internal comms? Do you have any early results that you can share?
Allie, I'm going to pass that to you to do first.
Yeah, sure. So right now, because email is our primary means of communicating with people, we cast a wide net and we're sending it to all colleagues. We're not really stratifying it just yet. So knowing that we're kind of casting a wide net, we are looking behind the scenes at what the data is telling us, like who's opening it, when, what kind of role they're in. So from that data, I've been able to tweak content, knowing who's the most likely person to be looking at it and how I've delivered it. Eventually, we want to get to the point where we can make more targeted communication, and we're looking at expanding our suite of internal comms tools to be able to do that more effectively, especially for our frontline workers who are like literally on the floors of the hospital delivering care, and they're not sitting in front of a desktop. But I will say, to Ellen, your point earlier, I found that having a familiar face in there, recognizing people, pictures of our colleagues doing things, both great and small, is a very big draw. And one way that we've tried recently to really pull more people into opening the newsletter is fiddling with our subject lines. And so we started, kind of changing that approach in the middle of January of this year. And I don't know, Kelly, I don't want to put you on the spot, but can you, are you able to pull that up so folks can kind of see what I'm talking about?
I feel like subject lines are often the bane of our existence, right? I mean, that is where I get the most writer block. Can I do them? Yes. Do I absolutely hate doing them? Yes.
Yeah. So you can see, thank you, Kelly. You can see, at first we were kind of just like, this is the date, this is the daily news. And it was just kind of like, boom, 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 boom. This is everything that's in the newsletter. And then we sometimes end up with these subject lines that were quite long. And I could see people kind of being like, oh, this is like too much. Like, I can't handle this right now. And so, I wanted to start changing the subject lines to entice more people to open it, just by being a little bit more simple. And I don't want to say clickbaity, because I don't like to feel like I'm like duping people into reading the newsletter. I want them to be enthusiastically consenting to opening up our newsletter, but I try and like make it fun. But Ellen, to your point, every day I go through this like existential crisis where I'm like, what subject line am I going to do? Is this too over the top? Is this crazy? And like, sometimes I'm cringing, but then it goes out and like more people open it. And I'm like, oh, okay, maybe they liked that. So you can kind of see, like, when even just from like the first day that we implemented this new subject lines, you could see that we already had like a little bump in our opens. And this was, in the middle of January, and like everybody was coming into our hospital with like flu, COVID, RSV, everything. And we were so busy. And I was like, oh, even despite of it being a really, really busy time for everybody, we still had a nice little bump in our opens that we continue to see to this day.
I think name dropping is always a good way too, right? When you're pulling people in, if there's somebody that they really respect and admire around the company that they want to see, right? Name dropping that into the subject line is never a bad idea. I think too, with personalization, it's really about, again, that business partnership, right? Who are your key stakeholders? Do you really know who those are for each particular need, especially when it comes to the change management piece? And so, for example, I think about like global survey results, right? When you do a global engagement survey out to your population, participation is really a big goal, right? You want to make sure that everybody's participating, so you're getting a really good data set. But for us, it's, and that's huge. It takes a lot of effort to get one of those surveys out, especially when you're talking, about, populations that include everybody all the way down to production, right? But the results action planning piece is even bigger, because we play a role there in making sure that, they're personalizing their communications about their actions to those specific audiences and those specific teams. So like, if we see leaders aren't communicating well, what are we doing to support them? Are we giving them templates or writing classes or shorter, more focused comms that they can read and cascade, right? If people aren't understanding the strategy and the values, how are we reaching and enabling managers? Are we sharing the strategies and progress with them first, right? That's one of those stakeholders that we really need to make sure is engaged. And it's a hard one to reach, because they're managers, they have a job to do, and we're asking them to do so much more. Those things. I think, can people be themselves? Are we breaking down barriers? Are we putting in those powerful stories of career moments and linking to like inclusive cross-functional social media groups? Are we promoting leadership touch points, et cetera? I think, again, those are some of the things we need to be thinking about when we look at the data, right? That gives us some ideas of what we can then do next, beyond a one and done approach or beyond a single channel.
Oh,
Baron, I think we lost you.
Thank you for that. Ellen, you had mentioned management in what you were talking about just now. And I know it wasn't in the context of the question I'm about to ask, but I thought it was a good segue here. One of the questions that we got in the chat was, how do you show to upper management the effectiveness of your email communications? It's also a three-part question. So that's the first one. How do you show to upper management the effectiveness of the email communications? The second part is, are there any target metrics or KPIs or anything similar? And can you share how we can best present the value of these communications? And I see that we actually have this question highlighted here, so you can read it and answer it that way.
I love that. And this goes back, I think, to what I was saying at the beginning is that, again, we have to go beyond the clicks and the readership, because it's great to show them that, right? It shows that people are actually reading the communications. That's important. But then how does that translate to being productive and effective at work? How does that translate to business results and customer results? Do they know our strategy? Are they implementing our strategy? Are they engaged in that strategy? Are they participating in the people programs that we put out there? Are they taking advantage of learning opportunities? So I always tie those metrics, those email communications metrics and intranet metrics and things like that, Yammer metrics, we use Yammer. I tie them back to, okay, so how many people actually enrolled in their benefits? How many went out and actively enrolled? Annual enrollment, that's a big one for us, right? How many people actually participated in the survey, right? How many people responded that communications in that survey responded that communications is effective at the company? How many people went to the events that we published, right? So it's looking at both, again, the click, the readership, et cetera, those quantitative, and then the qualitative. I think that's important. And for target metrics and KPIs, gosh, that's a good one. I think you have to benchmark and then you have to grow those over time. But again, the readership, right? Are people reading it? When are they reading it? Who's reading it? Where are they reading it? Is it mobile? Is it desktop? Those are good ones to know. KPIs, again, go back to things like maybe attrition rates, retention rates, new hire surveys, things like that. That's data you can mine to see if you're actually making a difference in your comms. And how really to present the value of these communications is, again, through tying that to the business results, because that's what the leaders want to see, is they don't want to see just that you're communicating, but how it's actually making a difference. Allie.
No, I agree with all of that. And, at South Shore Health, internal communications is a huge area of focus for the senior leadership team and a vehicle that they really rely on to get important messaging out, whether it's talking points or what our strategic goals are for the year and beyond. So, I do have a standing meeting with the president and CEO, our senior vice president, a chief strategy officer, a VP of marketing and communications, where I am tasked with kind of presenting not just the previous month's data, but just putting it all in context, like how are we doing over time? What's the trajectory of our communications? And just through that, I can say, just to add on what Ellen said, we recently migrated as an organization to M365, a different form of SharePoint, and I'm getting data from that. So now I'm comparing the data that I'm, culling from the emails onto SharePoint. And for me, a relatively new revelation was that, the email is actually driving people to the intranet. So we have Staffbase email, and people are getting that. They're seeing a snippet of a story that's interesting to them, and they're clicking it and going to our intranet, even though the same content is kind of shared in both vehicles. So I thought that was an interesting, nugget to kind of, as we move forward with potentially expanding our suite of internal communications, like how the two channels kind of are feeding each other, and, the importance of continuing to put out a really high quality, consistent, succinct newsletter.
And that multi-channel approach, I was just going to say that multi-channel approach is key, right? Because you can't just rely on, and I said it before, the one and done, particularly if you're doing big change management. I'll give you an example that ties back to the strategy. Last year, we had to do a huge change management initiative with IT, and it involved, 100,000 mailboxes, all of the employees globally, and it was a months-long effort. And it wasn't just about who attended the training sessions or who was reading the comms. At the end of the day, when we made the shift, right, when they implemented the policy change in the tool, there were only 50 IT tickets. That's a really small number of IT tickets for that many people and that much change. And the business loved that, right? It was a really good result from all of the efforts that we put in and all of the channels. And it was, we told them again, we told them one more time, that we told them approach, right? Again and again and again.
This multi-channel approach is honestly an excellent segue to this next question. And it's, how do you differentiate what goes into a newsletter versus what goes to the front page of the intranet?
Allie.
Yeah, sure. So just to give everybody a little bit of background, like our newsletter is very, we try and keep it as short as possible, very visual with consistent sections. So at the very top of the newsletter, it's the header is what you need to know now. And so it's the most important piece of information for that day. And then right below it, we have good news. So that's like a good news story. Like our colleagues did this, they got this award, they made this presentation. These community members came to our NICU and donated a bunch of, baby blankets, like that kind of thing that's kind of boosts morale. And then underneath it, we have kind of like an event that's coming up or training or like, something like that. And then along with a calendar. And then there's a very brief, like in case you missed it section, like that just kind of summarizes the most important news from earlier in the week. So people can really just skim it as quickly as possible. So all that is to say is that I try and keep things as short as possible in the newsletter and make it very visual. And then the stuff that goes onto our intranet, we have a rotating carousel at the top of the intranet. So another good visual piece that people can click on, and it drives them to other pages that they might need to go if they're interested in more information. And then below that, we have like a list of stories. So those are the longer form stories that I'll often reference in the newsletter. And then people will click it if they want to, read more about it. So the way that I kind of conceptualize what goes where, and it's not always this hard and fast thing, is it's just like, I want to give people the choice of like, if they want to learn more, because it might not be relevant to them. Again, like I said, I'm sending this newsletter out to everybody, and I might be, saying, oh, guess what? We're running another an internal grow your own program where we take nurses and we, develop them to work in a specialty or something like that. That's not going to be relevant to all of my readers. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. But if somebody sees that and is interested, they can click on it. It drives them to the portal or the intranet, and they can get more information. So I'm always trying to be respectful of people's time and attention. And that's kind of how I differentiate where I put what.
I like what you said there about choice, because oftentimes I think you'll have content that matches actually in both places, right? Because you know that some people read email, you know that some people go to the intranet, you know that some people go to an app, right? It may depend generationally, it may depend based on role, it may depend based on timing and need. And so I think that, oftentimes that content can match. But I agree with Allie. It's the quick hit when you're sending it out, because again, email is still a primary communication tool, and people are overwhelmed, right? And so it's quick hit. I can read it in a couple of minutes and then click out to what I really want to see on the intranet. And that intranet homepage may mirror some of that kind of quick hit mentality as well. It's about choice, giving them choice.
Man, you guys are good. I love listening to this. This is awesome. I'm going to move us on to our next topic of conversation now, and that is around segmentation, around targeting. So how do you segment your employee groups for targeted emails? And what have you learned from that, both good and bad?
It's interesting. It depends, right? Really, I think it depends on the change management need, right? It really depends on what you're trying to do. What is your outcome, right? Again, knowing those key stakeholders. I think that when you can go in and see some of the metrics that you've used before, understanding those audiences, when they're actually going to read, if they're going to read, it can help you determine whether or not you need to send a global email, or whether it needs to just be a team, or whether it needs to be a cascade approach, right? That goes to the leadership, and then managers, and then supervisors, and then teams, et cetera. So it really depends. It goes back to that need. It goes back to the outcome of the business. But I would say, to not be afraid of metrics, right? We launched a first global newsletter, and we launched it to everybody. And instead of segmenting people out, we really wanted across the operating companies for people to get to know the other teams, the other companies, and what they did. And we had one question in the bottom that was kind of like that employee NPS score at the bottom. that asked if it was interesting, and the results were not good, but there weren't many people that replied. So again, it was kind of like, okay, we'll take that with a grain of salt and see how we did. But the readership was fantastic. So people were reading it. It has been steady ever since. But the best result, again, I'm going to go back to, it wasn't just the readership, was that the employee storytelling on our internal social, our Yammer site, just exploded. We started getting so many more, not just the comments and the likes and the shares, but the answers to questions, the participating in the communities, the new communities that were tied back to what our businesses do. We started to see things like our safety focused posts, right? If you're in a manufacturing, we're in an industrial manufacturing conglomerate. And if you're in any type of manufacturing, you know, safety first, right? But we were starting to see comments from other people and other opcos congratulating people on their 1,000 days of no incidents, something that we hadn't seen before, and they're celebrating each other. It just expands their worldview. So again, we didn't segment it, and we started, and that was a concern, right? That, oh, there was this concern that people weren't going to pay attention to the other companies because they didn't work there and it didn't mean anything to them. But it did, because these are commonalities. Safety is a commonality. Career stories are a commonality that really hit home with people. So yeah, I would say, you know, don't be afraid of metrics. At first, you might get some ones that don't really look good, but that's okay.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, we're not really segmenting our newsletter at this point. We're casting a wide net. And to Ellen, to your point, you know, it's the same reason why we follow random people on Instagram. We're curious, even if they're not, you know, like us in any way. We want to see what they're up to and what they're doing. So I try and be really mindful when I'm curating the newsletter that I'm showcasing content and people from across the system. You know, the hospital, there's a lot going on at the hospital, so there tends to be a lot of content coming out of there, but I really try and make sure we're getting content from our ambulatory care sites, our administrative areas, our urgent care centers, so that everybody is represented. And so the, you know, people are more likely to look every day and be like, all right, am I going to see something? But also our colleagues are our best brand ambassadors. So we want them to know what's going on across the health system. We want them to know about the advanced care that we're able to provide our community, because hopefully they're going to go around and they're going to tell somebody outside our health system, oh, did you know that, you know, we have this wonderful wound center with hyperbaric oxygen chambers and stuff like that. People might not, you know, be aware of right off the bat, as an example. So, but I will say, from looking at the metrics, we know we're not reaching our frontline people as much as we'd like to. So really, to ensure that communication is flowing equitably across the organization, we need to start looking at other ways to reach that mobile group.
That's exactly right. That's that multi-channel approach, right? I always say to people that sometimes it's good to just go old school, right? I mean, this is where, you know, we need to remember that there are still many people that either aren't comfortable with digital or don't have access to it during the day, right? And so, you know, when you're thinking about, again, the big change management needs, where we're trying to get people engaged, those, you know, things like print, if you can afford to do some print. I mean, simple table tents, literally taking a piece of paper, putting the information on both sides, printing it and folding it in half and putting it in a cafeteria table. It's something to read. Posters in the bathrooms. Those, we know those still work, right? I think those are some, you know, again, ways that you can take those, take that multi-channel approach even out to everyone, really expand it.
The multi-channel approach.
Yeah, like exactly.
The throwback to paper. It's still there, right? If you have an office space, people are there. Yeah. I'm going to move us on to, we have some more questions in the chat, but I would like to move on to the last question that we have here. And then if there's time at the end for a more general Q&A. And speaking of generality, this last question is definitely our most general question. How important is refining your email strategy over time? And can you share any specific feedback or metrics that have helped shape your approach?
Mm-hmm. I can jump in on that one if that's okay, Ellen. So like I said, we've been doing the newsletter for about 3 years now. So we have a lot of data. We have a pretty solid understanding of like our open rates, who our audience is. And I can say pretty confidently that we've pretty much hit our saturation level. I mean, we've done a couple recent things with like tweaking the subject lines that I mentioned. So sometimes for me, I feel like, oh my gosh, have I hit the ceiling with what I can do with email? And then almost like the universe like comes to me and it brings me an idea, or like somebody will approach me and I'm like, you know what, maybe I'm getting a little too stuck into like the way that we've been doing things. And, you know, one example of that is that we recently had a bunch of like a grassroots committee of colleagues approach us and say, hey, you know, we run these blood drives fairly regularly with our partner Rhode Island Blood Center, who come on site and do blood drives that colleagues and members of the community are welcome to attend and donate. But we're not hitting as much you know, attendance as we would like. Is there anything, you know, you can do? And so the idea kind of came up in speaking with these colleagues. A lot of them were like passionate about blood donation themselves. And so it was a way, so we decided to create this mini campaign during January, which is National Blood Donor Month. And Kelly, if you don't mind, maybe you could bring up the little snippets of that and kind of use the stories of our colleagues to compel people to participate in these blood drives that we were advertising fairly regularly, but it was just more like an event that was happening, and kind of use the stories on the compelling narratives of our colleagues to invite people to learn more about blood donation and, you know, come in and attend one of our drives. And I'm proud to say, so we ran about 5 weeks of this campaign highlighting various different colleagues from across the health system, along with some like fun facts about their blood type and their pro tips for donating. And when we had that blood drive in February, they exceeded the goal by like 30%. So, I mean, I don't have the data for sure that says what we did helped drive the you know, improved response to our blood drive, but I like to think we had something to do with it. So our colleagues are seriously our best asset. These are wonderful people that come to work every day in difficult circumstances to care for our community. And, you know, on top of that, they're often doing these amazing things humbly, quietly beyond their normal role, like going, you know, after work, finishing a shift in the CCU, the critical care unit, and then going to donate blood before going home. And so I find that if we can, you know, use their stories, harness their stories to share, that really motivates our colleagues to do things.
I was going to go down the same path, Allie. So I'm glad you said it. It's about the recognition piece, right? If people don't feel engaged, they're going to leave, and you can see that in exit surveys. You can see it in global engagement surveys. And so I think it goes back to exactly what you're saying, Allie, is the recognition and the celebrating the people really supports those goals. And you know, like I look at when I think about engagement surveys, right? I think about the do people want to stay, right? That metric. Are we really taking all of our recognition tools or moments and sharing, you know, pieces of those, samples of those people recognized more broadly? Are we adding in things like coffee talks with our leaders, right? Are we finding stories that we can level up from different areas of the organization? And that's one of the great things about having a combined email tool, right, where you can do campaigns, is you can see some of, you know, when you're running the global comms, you can see some of the stuff that's being done more locally, and you can level it up to a global level, you know, or even to external social, right, which really gets that engagement going. Yeah, so I also think that you know, there are a lot of people that don't work with senior leaders on a regular basis, and so they appreciate that visibility and that acknowledgement in the comms content that you have out there. And that really helps shape my approach to comms that I'm doing. So it's just going beyond that one and done approach, right? And really demonstrating that business partnership.
We are coming down to our last 5 minutes. So I think this is now a good time to maybe go to some general Q&A that we have. The one that I really wanted to get across here is, how do you determine the best day to distribute your newsletter? Is Thursday too late in the week? Is Monday too early in the week? What's been working well for the two of you?
Oh my gosh, if you find the perfect time to send a newsletter and everybody opens it, like, please tell me, because this is like the holy grail question of internal comms. I've tried polling people, like, what's the cadence that you want? What's the time frame? And I get questions all across the board, which of course reflects the diverse nature of our workforce. So for me, I found like the best sweet spot that I can do is, we're sending the newsletter out 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. We have people working, multiple shifts where our hospital's a 24/7 operation. I try and send out the newsletter by 1 p.m. every weekday. Just looking at data, it seems like people are most active on and reading our communications on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays in the mornings. So I guess like people tend to come in on Monday if they have the typical like 9 to 5 and they're wading through their emails, and then like by Tuesday they have like the bandwidth to like receive more information. So I know that when we're working with senior leaders and we're trying to push out organizational announcements that are then reshared through the email newsletter on our portal, we're always advising like midweek, mid-morning to land in people's inbox, and then we kind of use the newsletter as a way to reiterate that messaging as well. And also kind of like setting the expectation is like the newsletter is going to come out like early afternoon every day. So people know what's happening. They know kind of a general sense of what categories of content are going to be in it. I mean, humans are like creatures of habit. And so if we kind of set that expectation, that cadence, I think that's helpful for people. They know what to expect.
I agree, and don't change it that often, right? And that's where don't be reactive, right? If you can give it some time and look at the metrics over time, it gives you a bigger picture. We send our global one on Tuesdays, never send anything globally on Friday because no one in Asia Pac is going to read it, right, until Monday, right? And so there's just too much time to foster between when the news happened and when they were reading it. But I send it Tuesday mornings. And then our US newsletter, we typically send around noon on Thursdays because that's when we know people are watching as well. So, or listening as well. But again, we cross, it's the entire globe, right? So you've got to be really careful about when you send it out, so you're reaching the most people within a certain time frame. So early Tuesdays works really well for global, and Thursday afternoons works really well for US, for us.
Ellen, it seems we might have lost Allie.
Allie.
I think she might have dropped on us, but that's okay. I was going to ask one more question, but we are actually basically at time here. So I really wanted to thank the two of you, or maybe just you.
I'll say thank you to Allie.
Yeah, thank you to Allie for this like truly wonderful
Thanks,
session. I really love the dynamic and the two different portals that you guys can bring into such an extremely nuanced role. And I know for me, even as a product marketing manager for email, like I feel like I understand use cases of our tool really, really well. And I learned some new things from the both of you today. So thank you both again so much for your time. And yeah, cheers.